The forest of Thalorian was quiet, but not peaceful. High above, silver leaves whispered in the wind, their glow lighting the worn path below. Kale moved quickly through the trees, every step careful. His boots were wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound. He knew the patrols would be close. Behind him, the ruins of an old tower faded into the shadows. He had found something deep within its broken floor, a black shard smooth and cold, glowing faintly in his hand. It had called to him. He didn't know how or why, but when he touched it, the world had gone still for a heartbeat, and then it had pulsed with strange light. Cal didn't have time to think about it now. He had to run. A sound behind him made him stop, soft like wind over dry grass. But it wasn't the wind. He ducked behind a root twisted like a claw and held his breath. Two elven scouts passed by, moving like ghosts, tall, pale, and dressed in green that shimmered like water. They looked like they belonged to the forest. Their longbows were silent in their hands. Cale stayed still until they were gone. Too close, he whispered to himself. He turned the shard over in his hand. It felt heavy, but not like a rock. More like memory or power. They had always said humans could not use magic, not real magic. Not like the elves. Humans could light fires and shake metal, but spellcasting was for those with elven blood. It had been that way for hundreds of years. Cale had never questioned it, not really. Not until now. He had touched the shard. It had answered. He kept running until the trees thinned. There, hidden beneath tangled vines, was a hole in the ground. It led to an old tunnel, one of the forgotten roads beneath the forest. Cale slid down, dirt falling around him, and landed hard in the dark. He lit a small lantern and moved forward, the light throwing long shadows on the stone walls. He had to get this to the others. They needed to see it. If the shard really was what he thought it was, everything could change. But deep in his gut, fear twisted, not of being caught, but of what the shard might mean. What if it was true? What if humans had once had magic, real magic, and it had been taken from them? He stopped and looked down at the shard again. It pulsed once more. This time he felt warmth crawl up his arm. Images flashed in his mind, runes, fire, a city burning, voices shouting in a forgotten tongue. Cale stumbled back, shaking his head. He had no idea what any of it meant. But he knew one thing. The elves had lied. The cave opened into a wide space filled with smoke and quiet firelight. Rough tents were set in a circle, and the scent of iron and oil hung in the air. Humans moved between the shadows, armed with worn weapons and sharp eyes. These were not farmers or servants. These were fighters, rebels. Cale stepped into the light, his boots leaving a trail of wet dust behind him. He kept the shard hidden under his coat. Even here, he wasn't sure who to trust. A tall woman with short dark hair stood near the fire, watching him. Her arms were crossed, and her eyes didn't miss a thing. "You're late," she said. Cale gave a small nod. "The ruins were deeper than I thought." The woman was named Lisa. She led this rebel camp. She had fought in more battles than Cale could count. Some said she once faced an elven blade and broke it with her bare hands. Cale pulled the shard from his coat and held it up. Its dark surface gleamed in the firelight. "This," he said, "was buried under the tower." Lisa stepped closer. She didn't touch it. Her face stayed calm, but her voice was low and sharp. "What does it do?" "I don't know," Cale said, "but it's old. It reacted when I picked it up. It showed me something. Magic, words I didn't understand, and I used it." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "Used it? What do you mean?" Cale looked around. The others were watching now. They had stopped sharpening their blades and cleaning armor. They were listening. "The elves chased me," Cale said. "I had nowhere to go. I thought I was done. But then the shard lit up. And I moved. I don't know how, but I stepped through space. One second I was there. The next I was far away." A silence fell. No one spoke. "Humans can't use magic," someone said from the back. Cale held up the shard. "Maybe we could once. Maybe we were made to forget." Lisa still didn't move, but her voice changed, softer now, filled with something else. Not fear, something like hope. "Do it again," she said. Cale focused. The shard grew warm. The edges of the cave began to bend, like heat over stone. A ripple passed through the air, and then it stopped. No one said a word. Lisa stepped forward and took the shard in both hands. This time, it didn't glow. It stayed dark. "It listens to you," she said. Cale nodded. "We need to find out why, and if there are more." Lisa turned to the others. We send scouts to the east ruins. If the elves buried this, there could be more. Then she looked at Kale. They think we're weak. They think we're broken. She pointed to the shard. Maybe it's time we remind them who we used to be. The morning sun barely broke through the thick canopy, casting long shadows on the forest floor. Kale stood at the edge of a clearing, watching the group of rebel scouts gather. Lisa stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon, sharp as always. Are we ready? Kale asked. Lisa nodded. We don't have much time. The elves will send more patrols soon. We need to move quickly. Kale glanced down at the shard, still tucked inside his coat. It had grown colder since he last held it, as if it were waiting for something or someone. He had no idea what its true purpose was, but the power it had given him before was real. It was enough to make him believe that something bigger was at play. If we find the ruins, Kale said, we might find more of these, more magic. But we have to be careful. The elves are more powerful than we think. Lisa smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. They might be powerful, but they've never faced us before. We fought with what we had. Now we fight with what we were meant to have. The scouts moved out, silent as shadows. Their feet barely touched the ground as they moved through the underbrush. Kale and Lisa followed behind, both lost in thought. Kale's mind raced with the possibilities. If the elves had hidden magic from humans, then what else had they taken? And why? It felt like there was a secret buried deep inside the earth, and the shard was the key to unlocking it. Hours passed, and the further they went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew taller, their bark dark and twisted, as if the land itself had been corrupted. The air felt thick, like the forest was holding its breath. They reached the ruins by dusk. What remained of the old city was a ghost of its former self. Broken stone walls lay scattered on the ground, half covered by moss and vines. The air was still, the only sound the rustle of the leaves above. This is it, Lisa whispered. Search the area. We need to find anything that might tell us more about what the elves hid. The group spread out, their footsteps muffled by the thick moss. Kale moved to the center of the ruins, where a large stone archway stood, half collapsed. He ran his fingers over the carvings on the stone, ancient symbols that seemed familiar, but he couldn't place them. The shard in his pocket pulsed again, warm and steady. It was reacting to something. Kale pulled it out and held it up, turning it slowly in his hands. The air around him seemed to shimmer, like the shard was pulling the very light from the sky. Kale! Lisa's voice rang out. Kale looked up, his heart racing. She was standing by a stone pedestal, her face pale. On the pedestal was another shard, identical to the one Kale held. This is what we've been looking for, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale stepped forward, his hands trembling as he reached for it. If this is what I think it is, Lisa said, we have a chance. A real chance to stand against the elves. Kale took the shard from the pedestal, feeling its power thrumming in his hand. For the first time since he found the first one, he felt like he was holding a piece of something much bigger, something that could change everything. The stone was cold under Kale's fingers as he held the second shard. It felt heavier than the first one, but somehow more familiar, like it had always belonged in his hand. For a moment, the world around him seemed to blur, the ruins fading away. All he could see was the shard, glowing with an inner light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Lisa's voice cut through his thoughts. Kale, we need to go, now. He blinked and looked around. The stone pedestal was empty, save for the marks where the shard had once rested. The other rebels were still searching the ruins, but there was a sense of urgency in the air. What's wrong? Kale asked, his voice low. We've stirred something, Lisa said. The elves will be here soon. Kale felt a chill creep up his spine. They had no time to waste. With the second shard in his hand, they now had a chance to change everything. But they had to get back to the camp before the elves found them. He slipped the shard into his coat, the weight of it pressing against his side. Let's move. The group gathered quickly, moving through the ruins with careful steps. Kale kept his eyes on the shadows, alert for any sign of the elves. They were too close, and he knew they would not hesitate to strike if they found them. As they made their way back through the forest, Kale's thoughts raced. 2 shards. They had found 2 of them, and both were filled with power. But what did it mean? Why had the elves hidden these fragments of magic? And what was it that the shards had shown him? Images of fire, of people standing tall, of a power long forgotten. The deeper they went into the forest, the more Kale felt like he was walking through a dream. The trees seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing longer. The forest felt alive, as if it were watching them. Lisa walked beside him, her face set in determination. "We need answers," she said, breaking the silence. "If the elves have been hiding this magic from us for so long, we have to understand why. We need to know what we're up against." Kel nodded. He understood. The elves had ruled for centuries, controlling magic, controlling the world. And they had made sure humans were kept in the dark, kept from discovering their true potential. But now, with the shards, everything had changed. They reached the edge of the forest where their camp waited. The firelight flickered in the distance, a beacon of safety in the growing darkness. But as they stepped out into the open, Kel's heart skipped a beat. A shape moved in the distance, tall and thin, like a shadow cast by the trees themselves. Another figure appeared beside it, and then another. The elves had found them. "Stay close," Lisa ordered. Kel's hand went to the hilt of his sword, but his mind raced. They had to get to the camp, to safety. But with the elves so close, he knew they wouldn't make it without a fight. The rebels tightened their formation, their weapons ready. Kel took a deep breath, feeling the power of the shards stir in his hands. They were not helpless anymore. "This ends now," Kel muttered, his voice filled with quiet resolve. The elves were not like the rebels. They were trained, disciplined, and moved with a quiet grace that made their presence all the more terrifying. Tall, with sharp features and eyes that glinted like silver, they stood in a half-circle, blocking the path to the camp. Kel's heart pounded. His fingers twitched around the hilt of his sword, but he knew a direct fight with these elves would be a mistake. They were too skilled, too powerful. No, they needed a plan. "We don't want trouble," Lisa said, her voice steady, though there was a flicker of tension in her eyes. "We are only passing through." The elf who stood at the front of the group tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Humans are not welcome here. You've come too far, trespassing where you should not." Kel stepped forward, feeling the weight of the shard beneath his coat. It was calling to him again, urging him to do something more than just fight with a sword. He glanced at Lisa, who gave him a quick nod. "We're not here to fight," Kel said, his voice strong, "but we are here to claim what was taken from us." The elf's eyes flickered for a moment, a hint of confusion passing over his face. "Claim what?" Kel reached into his coat and pulled out the shard. The elves had seen magic before, but they had never seen anything like this. The moment the shard left his coat, a pulse of power rippled through the air, making the ground beneath them vibrate. The elves stiffened, their eyes widening. "This was never meant to be hidden," Kel said, holding the shard high. "Humans had magic once, real magic, and now we have it again." The elf who had spoken earlier stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "You do not understand what you are dealing with. This power was sealed for a reason." Kel's voice was firm. "You sealed it to control us, to keep us weak. But that time is over." With a sudden motion, he raised the shard and focused on it. He could feel the power of the shard flooding through him, filling him with energy he had never known. It was as if the very air around him was alive, crackling with magic. The elves took a step back, clearly unsure of what to make of this new force in front of them. They had never seen a human wield magic like this. The elf leader's eyes hardened. "You think you can stand against us? You think you can break centuries of control with a simple stone?" Kel met his gaze without flinching. "I don't need a simple stone. I need my people to believe again. We have the power to change everything." The elf leader's face twisted into something between a snarl and a smile. "You may have power now, human, but you are still nothing compared to us." Kel didn't respond. Instead, he focused on the shard in his hand, feeling the magic grow stronger. This was just the beginning. He had no intention of letting the elves keep their hold on the world any longer. "We'll see about that," Kel muttered under his breath. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, and for the first time, the elves began to doubt their own certainty. The power of the humans was no longer a myth. It was real, and it was only the beginning. The elves stood motionless, their eyes fixed on Kel and the shard in his hand. The air was thick with tension, crackling like the stillness before a storm. No one spoke for a moment. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Kel's hand trembled slightly around the shard. The power he felt flowing through him was overwhelming. It was like holding a fire in his palm, dangerous yet necessary. His mind raced with possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. The elves had kept magic from humans for too long. Now it was his turn to use it. "You don't understand," the elf leader said, his voice low and full of warning. "This power is not meant for you. You cannot control it. You will destroy yourselves. Kale stepped forward, his feet silent on the forest floor. He could feel the power of the shard building in his grip, urging him forward, but he didn't let it control him. Not yet. Maybe it's time we stopped listening to you, he said, his voice steady but firm. For centuries, you've kept us in the dark. You've made sure we never knew what we were capable of. But we're not the same anymore. We've learned. And now we have magic of our own. The elf's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening around his sword hilt. You dare speak of magic as if you know it. Magic is not something you can just claim. It is a force of nature, older than your people. You are playing with fire. Kale could feel the weight of his words. They were true, but they didn't scare him anymore. The elves had used fear to control people for too long. But now that fear was slipping away. Then show me what you have, Kale said, his voice rising. If you're so certain of your power, prove it. The elves tensed. The air grew heavier, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind carrying a hint of danger. But the elf leader didn't move. Instead, he gave a sharp signal, and the elves began to retreat, melting back into the forest like shadows. This is not over, human, the elf leader called out, his voice cold and final. You will regret this. We will make sure of it. With that, the elves disappeared into the trees, leaving Kale and his group standing in the silence of the forest. The tension in the air didn't fade, but the immediate danger had passed. Kale lowered the shard, his heart still pounding in his chest. He could feel the power surging within him, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise that they could change things, that they could stand up to the elves and take back what was theirs. We did it, Lisa said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Kale nodded, though his mind was still racing. The elves had retreated for now, but he knew this was just the beginning. They would come back. They would try to stop them. But next time, Kale was ready. This is just the start, he said, turning to face the rebels. We have what we need. Now we fight. The fire of rebellion burned brighter in his chest. For the first time in his life, Kale felt like they had a real chance. A chance to break the chains that had held them for so long. The elves had underestimated them, and soon they would learn that humans were not so easy to control. Days passed in the camp, and the air was thick with the promise of something bigger. The rebels were preparing, sharpening their weapons, and learning to use the magic that had been hidden from them for so long. They no longer relied on the old ways of fighting. Now they had something more, something that could tip the balance in their favor. Kale sat by the fire, his fingers gently tracing the surface of the shard. The power within it hummed, a constant reminder of what they had uncovered. He had used the magic only a few times, but each time it felt more natural, more controlled. Like a part of him that had been missing for years. They'll come for us, Lisa said, sitting down beside him. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were hard-focused. The elves won't just sit back and let this go. We need to be ready. Kale nodded. He had thought about it constantly. The elves were proud, and their arrogance would be their downfall. But they were also dangerous. They had centuries of experience in fighting and controlling the world. They wouldn't let a group of humans stand in their way without a fight. What if they have more of these? Kale asked, holding up the shard. More magic hidden away. It's possible, Lisa replied. They've kept us in the dark for too long. But now that we've found these, we have a chance to turn the tide. They both stared into the fire, lost in thought. The flames crackled, sending small sparks into the night sky. Kale's mind raced with ideas. What if there were more shards out there? What if they could use the magic to do more than just defend themselves? Could they use it to strike at the heart of the Elven Empire itself? We need a plan, Lisa said, breaking the silence. A real one. We can't just wander into the Elves' stronghold without knowing what we're up against. Kale looked at her, his mind snapping into focus. We could start with the northern border. There's an old Elven fort there, abandoned for centuries. If they hid the shards anywhere, that might be the place. It's a risk, Lisa said, her eyes narrowing. We don't know how many elves are still there. It could be a trap. It might be, Kale agreed. But it's the best chance we have. If we can find more shards, we can finally level the playing field. Lisa was silent for a moment, then nodded. All right, we prepare. But we need to move quickly. The elves won't wait forever. The fire burned low as the two of them sat in the quiet night. The camp was still, but beneath the surface, tension ran deep. Every movement, every plan, was now weighed with the possibility of danger. Kale could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. But it wasn't just fear. It was something else. A growing determination. The elves had ruled for too long. They had stolen everything from the humans, their freedom, their magic, their place in the world. But no longer. Now the humans had something that the elves could never take away: hope. And hope, Cal knew, was the most dangerous weapon of all. The air was thick with anticipation as Cal and the rebels prepared for the journey ahead. They were at the edge of the camp, their gear packed, weapons ready. The night sky above was filled with stars, but even the peaceful view couldn't calm the tension that had settled over the group. Every step they took from here would bring them closer to the elves' stronghold, and the elves would not take kindly to this invasion. Cal stood by the campfire, the shard tucked safely inside his coat. His mind was filled with thoughts of the coming battle. The northern border was not far, but the journey would be dangerous. They would have to move swiftly, avoiding elf patrols, and make their way into the old fort where they hoped to find more shards. It was a gamble, but it was the only chance they had. "We'll move out at dawn," Lisa said, her voice low. She stood beside him, her gaze far off, scanning the horizon. "If we're lucky, we'll reach the fort by midday." Cal nodded, though his mind was far from certain. They had no idea what they would find when they reached the fort. It had been abandoned for centuries, but that didn't mean the elves hadn't left something behind, or that they hadn't returned to check on it. "Do you think they know we're coming?" Cal asked. "They're not blind," Lisa said with a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "They'll know. They always do. But that's what we're counting on. They'll expect us to be weak, to make mistakes. But this time we're ready." Cal looked at her, feeling a surge of determination. They had come so far. So much had changed since the days when humans were just shadows in the elves' eyes. Now they were something more. They were a force to be reckoned with. "We'll be ready," Cal said, his voice steady. "We'll show them what happens when they underestimate us." The rebels gathered in a circle around the fire, their faces set in hard lines. Cal could see the fear in their eyes, but it was different now. They weren't afraid of the elves anymore. They were afraid of what would happen if they didn't try. "Everyone knows the plan," Lisa said, looking around at each of them. "We move fast, we stay quiet, and we don't get caught. The fort is our best chance to find more magic, and we'll take it." Cal felt the weight of the shard in his coat once again. The magic it held was something the elves had kept hidden for centuries, but now it was theirs to use. It was their weapon, and they had a chance to fight back. "Let's do this," Cal said, his voice strong. As the fire flickered and died, the rebels packed their belongings and set out into the dark. The forest around them was quiet, almost too quiet. Every crack of a twig, every gust of wind, made their hearts race. They moved in silence, their steps light and quick. The path ahead was unclear, the shadows deep and filled with danger. But Cal didn't hesitate. They had come this far, and they would not stop now. The elves had underestimated them, thinking that the humans could never rise up, could never challenge their rule. But that was about to change. They were marching into enemy territory, but they were not afraid. They were ready to take back what was theirs.